She blinked. She crossed her arms. She nodded her head. And just like that, the impossible became real. For millions of Americans who grew up in the 1960s, Barbara Eden was not simply an actress on a television screen. She was magic itself, bottled, golden-haired, and eternal. A creature who existed outside the reach of time, outside the cruelty of ordinary life. Jeannie did not age. Jeannie did not grieve. Jeannie did not break. But Barbara Eden does. At 92 years old, the woman who once made the world believe in wishes now moves through public life with careful, deliberate steps. Guided by assistance, steadied by gentle hands, her smile still radiant, but her body carrying the undeniable weight of 9 decades of living. To see her this way is not simply sad. It is disorienting, because somewhere deep in the hearts of the generation that watched her every Friday night, Jeannie was supposed to live forever. What happened to Barbara Eden? Not to the character in the bottle, but to the woman who carried her? The woman behind the harem costume, behind the perfect hair and the network sensors and the carefully maintained illusion? Her story is not what most people expect. It is not a fairy tale. It never was. Stay with us. Long before the pink palazzo and the magic bottle, before the studio lights and the network contracts and the name that would become synonymous with enchantment, there was a little girl in Tucson, Arizona, who understood one thing with quiet, devastating clarity. She was on her own. Barbara Jean Moorhead was born on August 23, 1931, in a country still reeling from the Great Depression, in a household where money was a stranger and stability was a rumor. Her father, Arthur Moorhead, left when she was still too young to understand why, but old enough to feel the absence like a cold draft that never quite disappeared. He simply walked away from the family, from his wife Alice, and from the daughter who would spend the rest of her life performing for audiences who adored her. Perhaps because the applause filled a silence that began in that house in Tucson. Have you ever wondered what it does to a child to be left without explanation, not with cruelty, not with a scene, but with silence? Alice remarried, and the family eventually relocated to San Francisco, where Barbara took her stepfather's surname, Eden, carrying it forward into a career that would make it one of the most recognized names in American television history. But surnames do not fill the hollow places, and the hollow places were there from the beginning. She was not a child who drew attention in obvious ways. No tantrums, no rebellion, no visible fractures. Instead, she turned inward, and then upward, onto the stage. By her early teens, Barbara was studying voice, taking piano lessons, performing in school productions with an intensity that surprised her teachers. Not because she was chasing fame, but because, when she was performing, the hollow feeling receded. On stage, she was not the girl whose father had left. She was whoever the story needed her to be. That discovery, that performance, could transform pain into power, would define every decade that followed. San Francisco in the late 1940s was not Hollywood, but it was alive with possibility for a young woman with a voice, a face that photographers instinctively turned toward, and a hunger that her modest circumstances had sharpened into something formidable. She studied at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. She sang in local clubs. She auditioned relentlessly, collecting rejections the way other young women collected compliments. Her mother worked. Her stepfather worked. Barbara worked. There was no safety net, no family connection to the industry, no door held open by privilege. Every step forward was her own. Years later, in one of her rare reflective interviews, she would say quietly, "I always felt I had to prove something. I'm not entirely sure to whom." That sentence, small as it sounds, contains the entire architecture of her life. The father who left without explanation had handed her, without knowing it, the most powerful fuel an entertainer can carry. The need to be seen, the need to be chosen, the need to be undeniably, irrevocably enough. She arrived in Hollywood the way most do, with a suitcase, a dream, and absolutely no guarantee that either would survive the city. It was the early 1950s, and Los Angeles was a machine that consumed beautiful, talented young women by the hundreds. The studios were kingdoms with their own rules, their own hierarchies, their own particular cruelties. For every name that rose to the marquee, there were thousands that dissolved into the background, waitressing, auditioning, waiting, disappearing. Barbara Eden had every reason to become one of them. She did not. What separated her was not a single breakthrough moment. No legendary discovery at a soda counter, no producer who saw her across a crowded room and declared her a star. What separated her was relentless, unglamorous persistence. She auditioned for everything. She took television work when film work was scarce. She sang when acting jobs dried up. She smiled through screen tests that went nowhere, through callbacks that evaporated, through roles that went to women whose names she recognized from the studio lists. Her early television appearances in the mid-1950s were the kind that built careers slowly and invisibly. Guest spots on series like The Johnny Carson Show, I Love Lucy reruns opposite familiar faces, episodic roles that kept her working but nowhere near the center of anything. She married her first husband, actor Michael Ansara, in 1958, and for a time the marriage offered both companionship and a certain professional stability. But stability in Hollywood is always borrowed. Then came 1964, and everything changed. Though not immediately, and not without resistance. When producer Sidney Sheldon conceived I Dream of Jeannie, the network was not certain Barbara Eden was the right choice. She was 32 years old, considered, by the brutal mathematics of the industry, to be past the ingenue window. There were younger actresses, there were names with more momentum, but Sheldon saw something the others missed. Not just beauty, not just charm, but a particular quality that is almost impossible to manufacture. She made the fantastical feel warm. She made magic feel safe. The casting was confirmed. The costume was designed. The bottle was built. And on September 18, 1965, I Dream of Jeannie premiered on NBC. What followed was one of the strangest cultural phenomena in American television history. The show was not a critical triumph. Reviewers were largely dismissive, treating it as frivolous fantasy, unworthy of serious attention. But the audience did not care what the critics thought. They fell completely, helplessly in love. With Jeannie, with Barbara, with the idea that somewhere in the world there existed a woman of limitless power who chose, above all things, to love. And here is the question that the cameras never asked, but that Barbara herself has circled for decades. What does it cost a real woman to spend 5 years embodying the perfect fantasy of one? Because while Jeannie blinked away every problem in 30 minutes, Barbara Eden was living a life the costume could not protect her from. A marriage under strain. A Hollywood that would never quite know what to do with her once the bottle closed. And a longing for the one thing no amount of magic, on screen or off, could conjure on demand. A family that stayed whole. The show ended in 1970. 5 seasons, 139 episodes. A legacy so complete that 5 decades later, children who were not yet born when it aired still recognize the name, still hum the theme, still understand the reference instantly. But when the cameras went dark and the costume was folded away for the last time, Barbara Eden walked back into an ordinary life that had been quietly fracturing beneath the sequins and the studio lights. Her marriage to Michael Ansara had survived the filming of I Dream of Jeannie. Barely, and at a cost that neither of them discussed publicly for years. The demands of two acting careers, the particular loneliness of a Hollywood marriage where both partners are perpetually performing for someone else's benefit, and the private pressures that accumulate in the silence between takes. All of it had been slowly eroding what they had built together. In 1973, after 15 years of marriage, they divorced. Barbara did not speak bitterly about it then. She has not spoken bitterly about it since. That restraint, that fundamental unwillingness to wound in public, is one of the most consistent things about her across 9 decades of interviews, profiles, and memoirs. She absorbed pain privately. She grieved privately. She rebuilt privately. And then she returned to the camera with a smile so practiced and so genuine that audiences never suspected the cost. She married again. Charles Donald Fagert in 1977, a relationship that lasted only a year before it too dissolved, quietly, without the tabloid spectacle that the industry so readily provided for other celebrities of her stature. And then, a third time. John Eichholz, an architect, in 1991. A marriage that finally offered the steadiness that the previous two had not. They remain together today, more than 30 years later. A fact that Barbara mentions with a softness in her voice that suggests she understands, perhaps better than most, how rare that is. 3 marriages. 3 entirely different chapters of a woman's inner life, compressed into the public imagination of someone who never aged, never struggled, never needed anything she could not conjure with a blink. But the deepest wound of this era was not romantic. It arrived on December 9, 1977, in the form of a birth that transformed her completely. Her son, Matthew Ansara, born to Barbara and her first husband, Michael, entered the world and instantly reorganized everything she thought she understood about love, about vulnerability, about what truly mattered beneath the performances and the contracts and the carefully maintained public face. Matthew was her miracle, the one achievement, she has said more than once, that made everything else, the auditions, the rejections, the years of relentless striving, feel not just worthwhile, but necessary, as if every difficult thing that had come before had been preparing her, without her knowledge, for the specific, irreplaceable joy of being his mother. She poured into Matthew what her own childhood had lacked: presence, constancy, the certainty that he was chosen, wanted, seen. Every role she accepted after his birth was measured against a new standard. Would it take her away from him? And if so, for how long? And was it worth it? It is a calculation that working mothers have always made in silence, in the gap between ambition and love. Barbara Eden made it with her eyes open, knowing the cost either way. She could not have known, in those early years of his life, watching him grow with the particular fierce tenderness of a mother who had once been a girl whose father left. She could not have known what was coming. No amount of magic could have prepared her for that. There are losses that break a person visibly, that crack the surface, spill the grief outward, demand witness. And there are losses that go somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath language and public expression, somewhere that no interview question can reach, and no camera can follow. What happened to Barbara Eden in 2001 was the second kind. Matthew Ansara was 23 years old when he died on June 25th of that year. He had struggled for years with addiction, A battle that Barbara has spoken about only in carefully chosen words, in measured sentences that convey the magnitude of the pain without surrendering the privacy that she fiercely protected for her son, even after he was gone. She did not sensationalize his suffering. She did not offer his story as content. She held it close, the way a mother holds the things that belong only to her child. What she has said, in the years since, is this: you never get over it. You just learn to carry it differently. 8 words that contain more truth about grief than most books manage in 300 pages. Matthew's death arrived at a moment when Barbara was 69 years old and had already survived enough. The absent father, the failed marriages, the Hollywood machinery that discards women with industrial efficiency, the moment they pass an invisible age threshold. She had rebuilt herself so many times that rebuilding had become a kind of muscle memory. But this was different. This was not a career setback or a relationship ending or a public humiliation that time and work could repair. This was her son. And here is what the world did not see. Because Barbara Eden did not allow the world to see it. The years immediately following Matthew's death were the quietest of her professional life. Not because she stopped working. She continued to work, continued to appear, continued to honor commitments with the discipline that had carried her from Tucson to Hollywood to a legacy that transcended the specific show that had made her name. But something behind her eyes shifted. Those who had known her for decades noticed it. A new weight in the stillness between her words. A quality of endurance that went beyond professional resilience into something more fundamental and more private. She channeled her grief, eventually, into advocacy. She became a quiet but consistent supporter of addiction awareness organizations, speaking at events, lending her name to causes, refusing to let her son's struggle become invisible simply because the outcome had been unbearable. It was an act of extraordinary courage dressed in ordinary clothes. The kind of courage that does not announce itself or seek recognition, but simply shows up year after year and does the work. Do you know what it takes to transform the worst thing that ever happened to you into something that might protect someone else's child? Barbara Eden knows. She has never asked for credit for it. She has never positioned herself as a survivor or a spokesperson in ways that might overshadow Matthew's memory with her own narrative. She carried it the way she has carried every difficult thing in her life, with a grace so complete that casual observers mistook it for ease. It was never ease. It was discipline. It was love. It was the decision, made every single morning for more than 2 decades, to keep going in honor of the boy who could not. The bottle that once held Jeannie had always been, in the end, a metaphor. Magic contained. Power waiting to be released. Barbara Eden had spent her life releasing it for others. Now she was learning, in the hardest way imaginable, how to survive when there was no magic left to summon. Hollywood has a particular way of retiring women without telling them. There is no meeting, no formal announcement, no honest conversation across a conference table where someone looks you in the eye and says the words plainly. Instead, the phone calls simply become less frequent. The auditions thin out. The roles that arrive are smaller, older, more peripheral. Character parts in films built around younger faces. Guest appearances on shows where the point is nostalgia rather than story. The industry does not push women of a certain age toward the exit. It simply stops holding the door open. Barbara Eden watched it happen to other women. She refused to let it happen to her. In the decades following I Dream of Jeannie, while the industry was quietly reclassifying her as a legacy act rather than an active talent, she built a parallel career through sheer force of will and an instinctive understanding of what her audience actually wanted. She returned to her musical roots, performing in theater productions across the country. Taking I Dream of Jeannie, the musical on national tour with an energy that stunned audiences who had expected nostalgia and received something far more vital. She was not coasting on memory. She was creating new ones. She wrote. Her 2011 memoir, Jeannie Out of the Bottle, became a bestseller, not because it was salacious or revelatory in the way that Hollywood memoirs often weaponize vulnerability, but because it was honest in a quieter, more uncomfortable way. It told the truth about the gap between the woman and the character, between the smile and the suffering, between the image that America had loved for 50 years and the life that image had both enabled and concealed. Readers recognized something in it. Not just fans of the show, but women of a certain generation who had also spent decades performing versions of themselves that were warmer, softer, and more accommodating than the full, complicated truth. Barbara Eden had given them language for an experience they had lived but rarely seen named. She continued to appear publicly, at fan conventions, at charity events, at television retrospectives, where she was inevitably asked the same questions she had been answering since 1965. And she answered them each time with a patience and warmth that never felt manufactured, because it was not. The warmth was real. What was also real, and what required considerably more effort to maintain, was the resilience underneath it. There were health challenges she navigated largely outside of public view. There was the ongoing weight of Matthew's absence, carried forward into every year that followed. There was the particular psychological labor of remaining gracious and present in an industry that had long since moved its attention elsewhere. Of understanding that the love the audience felt for Jeannie was real, even when its relationship to Barbara herself was complicated. She never confused the two. That clarity, the ability to honor the character without being consumed by her, may be the most underestimated achievement of her entire career. Because here is what most people missed: watching Barbara Eden smile at fan conventions and wave from parade floats, and sign photographs of a woman she had last fully inhabited 60 years ago. She was not living in the past. She was simply refusing to be erased by the present. In the spring of 2023, photographs circulated online that stopped people mid-scroll. Barbara Eden attending a public event in Los Angeles, moving carefully along a red carpet. Not with the confident stride that had once defined her public appearances, but with the measured, deliberate steps of someone navigating a body that no longer responds with the ease it once did. An assistant at her elbow, a hand extended for steadiness, her smile, as always, fully present, her eyes, as always, luminous. But the frailty was undeniable, and the internet noticed immediately. The comments split in two directions that revealed something important about how America processes the aging of its icons. On one side, cruelty dressed as observation. The kind of reflexive mockery that the internet extends to any public figure caught being human. On the other side, something rawer and more honest. Grief. Not for Barbara Eden specifically, but for what her visible aging represented to the generation that had grown up watching her. She was supposed to be eternal. Jeannie doesn't get old, and if Jeannie gets old, then so do we. That is the particular anguish of watching a beloved icon age. It is not really about them. It is about the mirror they hold up unwillingly to everyone who loved them. Barbara Eden is 92 years old. She has lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the birth of American television, the collapse of the studio system, the sexual revolution, the women's movement, 5 decades of technological transformation, and the death of her only child. She has buried a father who left, a mother who stayed, and a son who was taken far too soon. She has maintained through all of it a public presence of such consistent warmth and dignity that the word gracious has become almost inseparable from her name. And now her body is telling the story that her spirit has always refused to tell. Those close to her describe her daily life in terms that are at once ordinary and quietly heroic. She moves more slowly. She tires more easily. The spine that once curved so effortlessly into Jeannie's signature poses now requires care, accommodation, the kind of physical negotiation that comes with 9 decades of living in a human body. Her vision has changed. Her stamina is not what it was. The gap between who she is inside, sharp, present, fully engaged with the world around her, and what her body can now reliably deliver has become one of the defining realities of her daily existence. John Eichholz, her husband of more than 30 years, remains her steadiest companion through this chapter. Those who have seen them together recently describe a tenderness between them that is not performed for any audience. The quiet, practiced intimacy of two people who have chosen each other across decades and continue to make that choice in the small, daily moments that no camera ever captures. She still appears publicly when her health permits. She still signs the photographs. She still offers the smile that launched 1,000 Halloween costumes and made a generation of Americans believe, for 30 minutes every Friday night, that magic was real and that the right wish, delivered to the right person, could fix absolutely anything. What no one tells you about magic, of course, is that the person performing it is always tired. There is a version of Barbara Eden's story that ends with the bottle, with the pink costume and the ponytail and the crossed arms and the nod, with Jeannie frozen in a single perfect gesture of effortless power, ageless and smiling, contained in glass, belonging to no particular era, and therefore to all of them equally. That is the version the culture prefers. Clean, timeless, uncomplicated by grief or illness or the specific weight of 92 years of actual living. But that version is not the truth. And Barbara Eden has spent her entire life earning the truth. The truth is a girl in Tucson whose father left without explanation, who turned that hollow silence into fuel and carried it all the way to Hollywood. The truth is a woman who survived 3 marriages, an industry designed to discard her, and the unsurvivable loss of her son, and who showed up every single time with her dignity intact and her warmth undiminished. The truth is the memoir that named what the costume concealed. The truth is the advocacy work carried out quietly, in Matthew's name, year after year, without applause or recognition as the goal. The truth is the woman on that red carpet in 2023, moving carefully, steadied by a gentle hand, still smiling. Not because she is pretending that everything is fine, but because after 92 years, she has earned the right to define for herself what strength looks like. It does not always look like magic. Sometimes it looks exactly like this. A woman who was never given everything she deserved, who built from what she had, who loved fiercely and lost unbearably and kept going anyway. Not because the going was easy, but because stopping was never something she knew how to do. Jeannie lived in a bottle. Barbara Eden never did. She lived in the world, fully and at great cost, and the world is immeasurably richer for it. If her story moved you, if it reminded you that the icons we love are human beings carrying weight we will never fully see, leave a comment below. Tell us what Barbara Eden meant to you. Subscribe for more stories of the extraordinary lives behind the legends. And ask yourself this: Who in your life is performing strength right now, quietly, without asking for anything in return? Maybe it is time to steady them, the way they always steadied you.